first of all, how does this partnership with AWS help you?
Thanks for having me on this afternoon, Emily. Look, we've been working with AWS for quite a while, rendering cloud solutions in that government-regulated space where there are usually more security requirements, and they've been a leader inside the government space, specifically providing the platform or the infrastructure we need to run. So we've collaborated rolling out SAP capabilities in human capital and also in some other ERP back-end capabilities. So it's been a natural working affinity, and what's happened is we've built a good experience base with them. So we can go to a customer and bring an SAP capability and their infrastructure to the cloud for them relatively rapidly.
So if AWS wins this contract with the Department of Defense, what does SAP bring to it?
Well, you know, Emily, I think the DoD contract is an interesting situation, and it's certainly, as you mentioned, a lot of press around it. The reality is that there are many cloud initiatives currently going on in the department, and we're working with the full panoply of providers, both the people you would normally know, the Googles and the Azures, as well as many of the smaller players. Obviously, whoever wins this contract is going to get a portion of work and maybe some potential preference in some areas. But the reality is that the department is really looking to embrace commercial technologies more across the board than it has historically, and cloud infrastructure is part of that. But at the end of the day, you have to put an application on top of the cloud to make it do something. And I suspect, even though there will be a winner potentially of this, and who knows, the acquisition, as you may be aware, is still being debated a little bit, both in Congress, with some oversight, and down in the department as well. It may modify, but when it's all said and done, there will be multiple providers of the cloud in this space. Even the Deputy Secretary of Defense, who is one of the key proponents of this, recently mentioned that probably only 10 to 20% of the actual work would go to this contract provider. So I think it's obvious to me that we're going to be working with all the providers over time, and it's really important that we do so.
And so then what do you make, Mark, then, of the concerns of rivals Oracle and Microsoft, who say giving this particular contract to one vendor is unfair?
I don't know if it's unfair necessarily. I think we can debate that. It's not for me to debate whether it's unfair. It's the department's indicated direction right now. This contract, as I said, will only represent, in my estimation, a small part of what ultimately is the cloud infrastructure. The Department of Defense is probably the largest, or among the largest, conglomerates in the world when you look at them as a business, Emily. So it would be very difficult to specify one player, particularly when there are a number of initiatives going on already. I think the winner may have some natural advantages in some of the new work, but if you look at the structure of the way the Department of Defense works, the military departments and their programs where the money comes are at much lower levels, and they make a lot of these buying decisions. So I suspect there will be, what really will come out of this as much as anything are standards more around how we integrate and interoperate across all the providers, one, and two, how do we enable and encourage more innovation and competition. To me, that's ultimately what needs to happen for the department.
What are going to be the biggest challenges of moving the federal government, and especially this part of the federal government, to the cloud?
Well, if you look at the government in general, it's broken into pieces, but in the defense space, and in general, the cloud itself is an enabler, much like many technologies and many people that come onto your program you talked about. They enable something. It needs to be married to a specific need or use case on top of that. And how we not only bring that use case to the customer, but then how we can innovate even further from there. Obviously, the Department of Defense and the government has acquired capabilities for a long time in standard ways that date back decades. And they have to emerge and evolve with that, and I think they will. And part of this is creating acquisition paths that make it easier for them to reach out and get it, and we're seeing that already. So I think if you and I are talking in a couple of years, we'll have significant movement here. I can tell you right now that we're working with probably 6 to 8 significant customers in the defense space working on initiatives right now. And so they are moving, and they're not waiting for the grand acquisition. They are really moving right now. So I think back in 2009, the CIO of the federal government pronounced that we're going to look at cloud first. And I think we're beginning to realize that now.
What are new security concerns that emerge with a Department of Defense that is in the cloud as opposed to on-premise?
Well, when you look at, there's always been this debate about security, but the cloud, what the cloud does bring is a set of standard capabilities around security and the ability to rapidly upgrade patches and new protecting capabilities that are much harder to do in distributed environments. I can speak from personal experience. We often hear, if you go back to the last fall with the Equifax event, that it was blamed on one patch not being applied. The reality is when you have hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of servers and devices connected, this is a much more complicated problem. The cloud allows us to do that more manageably from a central location. So I think the cloud brings security improvement in general. There may be some perceived more weaknesses because we've now put a lot of things in one place, but the reality, it's a much more secure infrastructure. And as the department and other government agencies and some of the regulated industries move in this area like utilities, I think we're going to find we're going to have a more secure environment rather than a less secure one.